I was 5 months pregnant when I found out my prenatal tonic wasn't helping my baby grow at all. It was sugar water, and it had been that way for 8 weeks. So how does a woman who never missed a single dose end up starving her own unborn child without knowing it? My name is Tara Sanders. I'm 36 years old, and I run a small financial consulting firm, the kind I built from nothing, with long nights, too much coffee, and the stubborn belief that if I worked hard enough, life would eventually reward me. I'm telling you this story because for most of my life, I thought betrayal came from strangers, from competitors, from people who wanted something I had. I was wrong. The worst betrayal of my life came from someone who knew my routine, my habits, my fears, and exactly how much I wanted this baby. It started on an ordinary morning. The kind of morning that looks harmless in your memory until you realize it was the day everything changed. I had woken up before sunrise, like I always did. My apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I remember standing in my kitchen in an oversized sweater, staring at the counter where my vitamins sat neatly beside my water bottle the same way they had sat every day for weeks. I took my prenatal tonic like I always did. One swallow, a small grimace at the sweetness, a quick rinse of water. Then I went straight back to work, answering emails and preparing for a client call like nothing in my life was fragile. But it was. By late morning, I started feeling off. At first, it was subtle. A little dizzy when I stood up too quickly. A strange heaviness in my arms, like I'd been lifting weights in my sleep. I blamed pregnancy hormones. I blamed stress. I blamed the fact that I was still working full-time while growing a human being. I had always been good at pushing through discomfort. It was practically my personality. But that day, my body wasn't asking politely anymore. It was warning me. I was walking from my bedroom to the bathroom when the room suddenly tilted, not in the gentle way you feel when you haven't eaten enough, but violently, like the floor had turned into water. My vision blurred. My heart began racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed the hallway wall, trying to steady myself, and for a second I thought, this is it. I'm fainting. It's fine. People faint during pregnancy. Then my knees buckled. I collapsed on the bathroom floor so hard the impact knocked the air out of me. The tile was freezing. It bit into my skin through my pajama pants. I tried to push myself up, but my arms shook uncontrollably, and I felt the sharp, terrifying realization that my body was no longer obeying me. I pressed my hand against my belly instinctively. That was the first thing I did. Not check my head. Not check my breathing. Just my baby. I whispered, please be okay. And then something happened that still makes my throat tighten when I remember it. My baby didn't move. Not right away. Normally, by 5 months, she was active. She kicked when I drank cold water. She fluttered when I lay down. She responded to my voice, to music, to stress, like she was already learning the world through my nervous system. But on that bathroom floor, she was still. And in that silence, I felt fear in its purest form. Not panic, not anxiety. Real, primal fear. The kind that turns your blood cold. I forced myself to breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, which had slid across the tile near the sink. It took me 3 tries to unlock it because my fingers were shaking so badly. When I finally dialed 911, my voice sounded strange even to me, distant, thin, like it belonged to someone else. I'm pregnant, I told the dispatcher. I'm 5 months. I collapsed. I feel like I can't breathe. The dispatcher stayed calm. She asked me questions I could barely answer. Where was I? Was I bleeding? Could I feel the baby move? I lied on that last one. I said yes, because I couldn't handle the alternative. 12 minutes? That's how long it took the ambulance to arrive. 12 minutes sounds short until you're lying on a cold bathroom floor, counting each second, with your hands wrapped around your stomach like you can physically shield your baby from whatever is happening inside you. I remember staring at the base of my bathtub. There was a tiny crack in the tile grout, something I'd noticed months earlier and never fixed. I remember thinking, if I lose her, I'll never forgive myself for not noticing sooner. Because deep down, even then, I knew something had been wrong for weeks. I had been exhausted, not the cute, glowing pregnancy tired that people talk about. This was a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that made me feel like my body was running on empty. I had been out of breath just walking up the stairs. My skin had looked pale in the mirror. I had started craving ice, chewing it absent-mindedly like a habit. And I didn't realize until later that craving ice is a classic sign of iron deficiency. But I wasn't thinking about any of that in the moment. I was thinking about my daughter. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved quickly. A man with a deep voice knelt beside me and asked my name. A woman checked my pulse and blood pressure. I heard the woman say, "Her heart rate is high." Then she asked me, "Have you eaten today?" Yes, I lied again. Because technically, I had, but it had been half a banana and a cup of coffee, which is basically nothing. They lifted me onto the stretcher, and as they rolled me through my apartment hallway, I caught a glimpse of my kitchen counter. My prenatal tonic was still there. The bottle looked expensive, elegant, like something a wealthy, caring sister would buy for you. That bottle had been a gift from my younger sister, Emery, and I had thanked her for it. I had actually thanked her. At the hospital, everything became bright and cold and fast. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and something metallic. The lights overhead were too harsh. The nurses asked me questions, drew blood, attached monitors to my stomach. I watched the screen that showed my baby's heartbeat like it was a lifeline. When I finally heard it strong and steady, I almost started crying right there. For a moment, I believed we were okay. But then the doctor came in. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of voice that delivered bad news gently, like she had done it 1,000 times. She introduced herself, then sat down beside my bed instead of standing. That alone told me something. Doctors only sit when they're about to say something that will change your life. "Mrs. Sanders," she said, flipping through my chart. "Your blood work is concerning." I swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Your iron levels are dangerously low. Your folic acid is also low. And based on the pattern, this isn't a sudden drop. This looks like prolonged nutritional deficiency." I stared at her. "But I take my prenatal tonic every day," I said. "I never miss it." She nodded slowly, as if she'd already heard that answer, and it didn't fit the data. "This level of deficiency doesn't happen if you're taking proper supplements," she said carefully. "Have you changed brands recently? Have you had trouble keeping food down? Any digestive issues?" "No," I said, and my voice started shaking. "Nothing. I've been tired. But I thought that was normal." The doctor's eyes softened. "Tired is normal," she said. "This is not." Then she leaned forward slightly. "Do you have your prenatal tonic with you?" I hesitated, because I did. It was in my purse. The same bottle I carried everywhere, because I liked being responsible. I liked knowing I was doing everything right. I reached into my bag with trembling hands and pulled it out. The doctor took the bottle like it was evidence. She didn't hand it to a nurse. She didn't set it aside casually. She looked at it closely, turning it in her hands, reading the label. Then she stood. "I'm going to send this to the lab," she said. "Right now." I watched her leave the room with it, and a strange chill crawled up my spine. I didn't understand why, not yet, but something in her expression had shifted. The kindness was still there, but underneath it was something else, something harder, something angry. An hour later, she returned, and I knew before she even spoke that my life was about to split into a before and after. She closed the curtain around my bed. She sat down again, and she said the words that still echo in my mind to this day. "Mrs. Sanders, this bottle contains no prenatal vitamins at all." I blinked at her. "What?" Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes didn't. "The lab tested it. It's sugar water, glucose, food coloring, nothing else." I felt the room tilt again, not physically this time, emotionally. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. "Someone replaced your supplements," she continued, "and they've been doing it long enough to put your baby at risk." I couldn't speak. My lips parted, but no sound came out. Because the first thought that entered my mind wasn't, who would do this? It was, I know exactly who had access to my home. And suddenly, the bottle in my doctor's hands didn't look like a gift anymore. It looked like a weapon. And the person who gave it to me was my own sister. When the doctor told me my prenatal tonic was nothing but sugar water, my mind didn't immediately jump to rage. It jumped to disbelief, because there are some thoughts your brain refuses to hold at first. They're too ugly, too impossible, too close to the heart. I sat there in that hospital bed, with the monitor still strapped around my stomach, listening to my daughter's heartbeat thumping steadily through the speaker, and I kept thinking the same sentence over and over again. This can't be real. This can't be my life. The doctor kept speaking, explaining nutrient absorption, fetal development, the risks of prolonged deficiency, but her words floated above me like a language I didn't know. All I could see was that bottle, the sleek label, the expensive-looking design, the way it had felt heavy and reassuring in my hand, like proof that I was doing everything right. And then, like a cruel little movie montage, my memory started replaying the past 8 weeks. Emery standing in my kitchen, smiling, telling me she'd found the best prenatal tonic money can buy. Emery asking, casually, "What time do you take it, morning or night?" Emery watching me pour the dose into a spoon and swallow it like a good girl, and me thanking her. I left the hospital that evening with a prescription for emergency supplements, a strict monitoring plan, and a fear I couldn't swallow. Outside, the sky was turning purple with dusk. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one. I sat in my car with both hands gripping the steering wheel, and for the first time in my pregnancy, I didn't feel excited about my baby shower or nursery paint colors or tiny socks. I felt hunted. But the worst part wasn't even the fear. The worst part was the confusion. Because when you're betrayed by someone close, you don't just lose trust in them, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start asking yourself questions that feel like knives. How did I not see it? How did I let her into my home? How many times did she look me in the eyes while she was doing it? And underneath all of that, there was another truth that hurt even more, a truth I had tried to deny my entire life. Emery had always been capable of taking something from me. She had been doing it since we were children. It just hadn't been this violent before. If you've never met my sister, you might not understand. People like Emery don't walk into a room. They take over a room. She's the kind of woman who can cry on command, the kind who makes strangers feel protective after 5 minutes of conversation, the kind who somehow always becomes the center of every story, even the ones that aren't hers. And growing up, my parents didn't just love her, they orbited her. My mother would say things like, "Emery is sensitive, she feels things deeply," as if sensitivity was a reason to excuse cruelty, as if feeling deeply meant she couldn't be held accountable for what she did to other people. My father was different. He didn't defend her out loud. He just never defended me. That was his specialty, silence. And when you grow up in a house like that, you learn something early. You learn that being good doesn't guarantee being chosen. I was the kind of child teachers praised, the kind who got straight A's, cleaned up after herself, never talked back, never made trouble. I learned to be helpful before I learned to be happy, because in my family, the fastest way to earn love was to become useful. But Emery didn't have to be useful. She just had to be loud. She just had to be dramatic. She just had to cry. I still remember my college graduation like it happened yesterday. Not because it was beautiful, because it was humiliating. I was the first person in my family to earn a degree in finance, and I didn't just earn it, I fought for it. I had been accepted into a program that only took 30 students that year. I worked part-time. I lived off ramen. I stayed up until 2 in the morning, running numbers and teaching myself concepts no one else in my family understood. That day, I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, and I scanned the audience for my parents' faces. I had imagined it so many times. My mother crying with pride, my father smiling, maybe even Emery cheering, for once, like a real sister. But the seats where they should have been were empty. I kept looking anyway, because some part of me still believed they might show up at the last second. They didn't. Later, I found out why. Emery had called that morning complaining of stomach pain. My parents rushed her to the emergency room, and it turned out to be nothing. Gas, anxiety, a mild stomach bug, something that would have passed whether they were there or not. But by the time they realized she was fine, my ceremony was over. I stood outside the auditorium afterward with my diploma in my hands, watching families hug and cry and take pictures, and I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself it was childish to care. I told myself I didn't need them. And I repeated that lie for the next 30 years. That's what makes people like me so easy to hurt. Not because we're weak, because we've been trained to accept pain as normal. And when my grandmother Eleanor was alive, she was the only person who seemed to notice. She'd call me on Sunday evenings when the rest of the family was busy fussing over Emery's latest crisis. She'd ask me about my work, about my plans, about my life. And sometimes she'd say things that felt strange at the time, like she was speaking to a future version of me. "You're the steady one, Tara," she would tell me. "Don't ever let them make you feel small." I used to smile politely and change the subject, because I didn't want to admit that I already felt small. But I understand now what she meant. My grandmother saw the pattern. She saw how my mother responded to Emery's tears like they were sacred, and how my father responded to conflict by disappearing behind silence. She saw how Emery learned early that if she made enough noise, the world would rearrange itself around her. And she saw how I learned to disappear so the noise would stop. 6 months ago, when my grandmother passed away, I thought grief might finally soften my family. I thought losing someone we all loved might make my parents look at me differently. I thought maybe, just maybe, we would sit together like adults and remember Eleanor with honesty. But grief doesn't heal a family built on favoritism. Grief just exposes it. The day her lawyer gathered us in his office, I sat on the edge of the chair with my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. I was already 4 months pregnant then. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not because I didn't want to share the joy, but because after years of trying and failing, I didn't trust happiness. I didn't trust it not to disappear. The lawyer began reading the terms of the trust, and when he said the number $12 million, my mother gasped like she'd been punched. My father blinked slowly. Emery smiled. Then the lawyer continued. And the condition changed everything. The granddaughter who gives birth to a child and demonstrates responsible care for that child within 2 years of Eleanor's passing would be appointed beneficiary trustee. In that moment, I felt my stomach drop. Not because of the money, but because I knew what this would do to my sister. I looked at Emery, and I watched the color drain from her face as she processed it. Because Emery had been trying to get pregnant for 5 years, 3 miscarriages, a marriage that collapsed under the grief, a life she believed she deserved that kept slipping away. And now, here I was, sitting quietly in that office, already pregnant, already holding the key to something she wanted more than anything. I didn't even have to say a word. The universe had said it for me, and the expression on Emery's face wasn't sadness. It was calculation. It was the look of someone realizing they were about to lose and deciding they would rather destroy the game than let someone else win. That night, at my parents' house, I passed the bathroom and heard her voice through the door. She was whispering, but the words were sharp enough to cut through the wood. "She never even wanted children," Emery said. "She never talked about it. I've been trying for 5 years. I lost my marriage over this, and she just gets pregnant by accident." There was a pause. Then she said, quietly, like a promise, "No, that's not how this ends." I should have been afraid, but I wasn't, because in that moment, I didn't recognize the danger. I recognized the pain. I felt sorry for her. And that pity, that was the first mistake that nearly cost my daughter her life. After I overheard Emery in the bathroom that night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was terrified, because I was trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. That's what people like me do when they grow up in families like mine. We don't trust our instincts. We don't trust what we hear. We don't trust what we feel. We explain it away. We soften it. We rewrite it until it hurts less. I told myself Emery was grieving. I told myself she was angry at life, not at me. I told myself she didn't mean it, And in a strange way, I think I wanted to believe her pain was harmless, because the alternative was too dark to accept. A sister doesn't become your enemy overnight, not in your mind, not in the story you want to live in. The next morning, I left my parents' house early. My mother was already in the kitchen, moving around quietly, like nothing had happened, like the air wasn't full of unspoken tension. She asked me if I wanted breakfast. I said no. I remember looking at her face and wondering if she had heard Emery too, if she knew, if she cared. But my mother's expression was neutral, practiced, the same expression she'd worn for years whenever I tried to bring up anything uncomfortable. My father sat at the table with his coffee, reading the news. He didn't look up. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say goodbye. And something in me, something old, tightened. Because even then, before the tonic, before the hospital, before the investigation, I could already feel the familiar truth settling into place. Whatever happened next, I would be on my own. 2 days later, Emery came to my apartment. She didn't text first. She didn't call. She just showed up with a bright smile and a large shopping bag like she was arriving to surprise me with love. When I opened the door, she stepped inside as if it were her home too. "Look at you," she said, her eyes flicking to my stomach. "You're already showing." There was something in her voice that sounded sweet on the surface, but underneath it was tight, controlled, like she was measuring every word. I tried to keep my tone casual. "What are you doing here?" Emery lifted the bag. "I brought you something," she said. "Actually, I brought you the best thing." She walked into my kitchen and placed the items on my counter like she was setting up a display. Everything looked expensive. Premium labels, gold caps, fancy packaging. It was the kind of stuff you'd see influencers promote. "I've been doing research," she said. "You know me. I can't help it." I almost laughed, because the irony was painful. For years, Emery had never researched anything for me. She hadn't cared what I studied, where I worked, what I built. But suddenly, now that I was pregnant, she was interested. Too interested. She pulled out a bottle and held it up. "This prenatal tonic is incredible," she said. "It's not like those cheap drugstore vitamins. It's high absorption, natural. It's the kind rich women take." I stared at the bottle. It looked heavy, legitimate, professional, and my first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was hope, because I wanted so badly to believe that maybe this was the moment Emery finally became my sister. Maybe she had hurt herself in that bathroom and realized she'd gone too far. Maybe she was trying to make up for it. Maybe she had finally decided to care. That's what makes betrayal so dangerous. It doesn't arrive wearing a warning label. It arrives wearing a smile. "I don't know, Em," I said carefully. "My doctor already recommended a brand." Emery waved her hand dismissively. "Doctors recommend the basic stuff," she said. "This is better. Trust me, I'm not going to let anything happen to my niece." My niece? The words hit me in the chest. Because no one in my family had said anything like that yet. Not my mother, not my father. Not even Ruth, my grandmother's closest friend, who had called to offer condolences after Eleanor passed. Emery was the first one to say my baby mattered. And I let that soften me. I should have been more careful. But I wasn't. Because I was still that girl who stood alone after graduation, holding a diploma and pretending she didn't need her parents to show up. I was still that girl who would accept scraps of affection like they were a feast. Emery stayed for nearly an hour. She asked questions. So many questions. At first, they sounded normal. "When's your next appointment? Are you craving anything? Do you feel her kick yet?" But then the questions shifted. "What time do you usually take your tonic?" she asked. "Morning," I said. "With food or without?" "With breakfast." "How much water do you drink after?" I blinked. "Why?" Emery laughed lightly, like I was silly. "I'm just trying to help," she said. "It matters for absorption." Then she walked over to my fridge and opened it without asking. I watched her pull out my orange juice and pour herself a glass. It was such a small thing, but it made my skin prickle. Because it wasn't familiarity, it was entitlement. She wandered through my kitchen, her eyes scanning the shelves, the drawers, the counter. She noticed everything. She pointed at the bottle of prenatal vitamins my doctor had recommended, sitting near the sink. "Are you still taking those too?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just one. I didn't want to overload." Emery nodded, satisfied. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. "I wrote down the schedule," she said, smiling, "so you don't forget." A notebook. She had written down my schedule, my dosage, my routine. I felt a strange chill, but again, I pushed it away. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself she was just trying to be supportive, because the truth was harder. The truth was that I didn't want to lose this new version of Emery, even if it felt unnatural. After that day, she kept coming, sometimes twice a week, sometimes 3 times. She would bring me new bottles, new supplements, herbal teas, pregnancy snacks. She'd rub my belly without asking. She'd talk to my stomach in a high, sweet voice like she was already claiming my baby as part of her story. And every time she left, I would stand in my doorway watching her walk down the hallway, and I would feel the same thing, relief. Not because she had helped me, but because she was gone. Yet at the same time, I also felt guilty for feeling relieved. Because wasn't this what I had always wanted? A sister who cared? A family who showed up? I tried to convince myself that the relief was just exhaustion. Pregnancy exhaustion, work exhaustion, life exhaustion. I had no idea my body was already being drained from the inside. Weeks passed. I grew more tired. I started forgetting things, which had never happened to me before. I missed a meeting time. I left my keys in the refrigerator. I stared at my computer screen sometimes and felt like the numbers were floating. At night, my legs would cramp so badly I'd wake up gasping. I started getting headaches. And the strangest part was, I felt hungry all the time. Not normal pregnancy hunger. A hollow hunger, like no matter what I ate, my body wasn't satisfied. I told my doctor at my next appointment, but the clinic was backed up, and my ultrasound looked normal. So they told me to rest, drink more water, and reduce stress. So I did what I always did. I kept working. I kept pushing. I kept swallowing that tonic every morning like a ritual of responsibility. Meanwhile, Emery kept showing up. One afternoon, she arrived while I was on a client call. I told her I couldn't talk. She smiled and said, "No problem. I'll just make myself tea." And she walked into my kitchen like she owned the place. When I finished the call 20 minutes later, I found her standing at my counter. My tonic bottle was open. The cap was sitting beside it, and Emery was holding a spoon. She turned when she heard me. "Oh," she said casually, "I was just checking the dose, to make sure you're taking enough." My throat tightened. "That's weird," I said. Emery laughed again. "You're so dramatic," she said. "I'm your sister." I didn't respond, because I didn't want to fight. Because fighting in my family never ended with someone apologizing. It ended with me being punished for speaking. So I swallowed my discomfort. I swallowed my fear, and I let her stay. A few days later, I went to my parents' house to drop off some paperwork my grandmother's lawyer had mailed to all of us. My mother was in the living room, writing something in a small leather diary. When she saw me, she snapped it shut so fast it looked like a reflex. I paused. "What's that?" I asked. My mother's smile was too quick. "Nothing," she said. "Just notes." "Notes about what?" She waved her hand. "Oh, family things." Then Emery walked into the room, and my mother slid the diary behind a cushion like she didn't want her to see it. That moment stayed with me, like a pebble in my shoe, small, but impossible to ignore. Then, a week later, Ruth stopped by my apartment unexpectedly. She was in her late 70s, my grandmother's closest friend for over 40 years. She moved slowly, but her eyes were sharp. She brought me homemade soup and stood in my doorway like she was afraid to step fully inside. "Eleanor asked me to give you something," Ruth said quietly. My heart lifted. "A letter?" I asked. Ruth shook her head. "Not yet," she said. She said, "When you become a mother." I frowned. "I am going to be a mother." Ruth's expression softened. "You're close," she said. But she told me to wait until the very end. until you needed it. Her voice dropped. And sweetheart, you're going to need it. Before I could ask what she meant, Ruth squeezed my hand and left. That night, I sat on my couch with my hands on my belly, listening to my daughter move inside me. And for the first time, I admitted something to myself that I had been refusing to see. Too many things felt wrong. Too many small moments didn't add up. My sister's sudden obsession, my mother's hidden diary, Ruth's strange warning, my growing exhaustion, and the way Emery watched me take that tonic every morning like she was studying a machine she planned to break. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself pregnancy made people anxious. I told myself I needed to stop being suspicious. And then, 8 weeks into Emery's help, I collapsed on my bathroom floor, and everything I had been denying finally came true. The hardest part about collapsing that morning wasn't the pain. It wasn't even the fear. It was the realization that my body had been begging me to notice something for weeks, and I hadn't listened. After the doctor told me my prenatal tonic was nothing but sugar water, I sat in my hospital bed for a long time without speaking. The fetal monitor was still strapped around my stomach. Every few seconds, the machine produced a steady rhythm. My daughter's heartbeat, strong, consistent, alive. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made my stomach twist. Because all I could think was, what if she hadn't been strong? What if I had waited 1 more week? 2? What if I had brushed off the dizziness again, told myself it was normal, and kept swallowing that fake tonic like a dutiful, foolish mother? The doctor came back in after speaking with the lab. Her face had changed. The kindness was still there, but now it was layered with something else, something protective, like she wasn't just a doctor anymore. She was a woman who had seen too many pregnant patients harmed by people who claimed to love them. "Tara," she said, sitting down beside me, "I need you to understand the seriousness of this." I swallowed hard. Is my baby going to be okay? She hesitated, and that hesitation felt like a knife. "We caught it in time," she said carefully. "But there are signs of developmental compromise. Not permanent, not necessarily. But we need to act quickly." I felt my throat close. "Compromise," I repeated. That's what you say when something's wrong." "Yes," she said softly. "Something was wrong. For 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks. The exact amount of time Emery had been visiting me constantly, bringing new bottles, asking about my routine, watching me swallow each dose. I felt my hands begin to shake. I pressed them against my belly to hide it. The doctor reached out and placed her hand lightly over mine. "I'm going to start you on emergency supplements," she said. "High-dose iron, folate, and a nutritional protocol. We're going to monitor the baby closely." I nodded. Then she took a breath, and her voice shifted again, more formal, more cautious. "There's something else," she said. I looked up. She held my gaze. "Because this appears to be deliberate tampering with a consumer product, and because you are a pregnant patient, I am legally required to report this." The words didn't register at first. "Report? What?" She said it slowly, like she was giving me time to catch up. "This is now a criminal matter. The police will need to be involved." Criminal. Police. Investigation. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching someone else live my life. Because that kind of thing doesn't happen to people like me. People like me who follow rules. People like me who take vitamins and schedule appointments and pay taxes and build businesses and believe the world is mostly fair. People like me don't end up in criminal investigations because their own sister tried to sabotage their pregnancy. Except, apparently they do. I was discharged late that evening. The nurse handed me a stack of papers and a small bag of emergency supplements. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages I didn't have the energy to read. Work, clients, calendar reminders, normal life. It felt obscene. As if the world didn't understand that something monstrous had just been revealed. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes before turning the key. I stared straight ahead and tried to breathe. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Tara?" she said, already irritated. "What is it?" "We're eating." "I was in the hospital," I said. A pause. Then, finally, a shift in her tone. What happened? I collapsed, I said. The doctor ran tests. Something's wrong with my iron and folate levels. They tested my prenatal tonic. Another pause. I could hear dishes clinking in the background. My mother's voice tightened. What about it? It's fake, I said. It's sugar water. Silence. Then, in the background, I heard Emery's laugh. Soft, familiar, and suddenly, I wasn't just scared. I was furious. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I just said, I'm coming over. My mother exhaled sharply. Tara, you're not thinking clearly. I'm coming over, I repeated. When I arrived at my parents' house, Emery was already there. Of course she was. She sat on the couch with a cup of tea in her hands, wearing a pale sweater and an expression that looked fragile, almost sickly. She looked like a victim. My father sat in his usual chair, eyes fixed on the television, pretending not to notice the tension in the room. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway like she was preparing for battle. I walked in holding the lab report in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Mom, I said, quietly. The doctors confirmed it. The bottle Emery gave me contains no vitamins. It's sugar water and food coloring. Emery's face crumpled instantly. It was impressive, honestly. Like she had practiced. She began to cry loud. Dramatic sobs that made my mother rush to her side immediately. Oh, honey, my mother whispered, stroking her hair. Oh, Emery. I stood there holding the lab report like an idiot, like I had brought evidence to a room where evidence didn't matter. Emery looked up at me through tears. Are you seriously implying I would hurt your baby? She choked out. After everything I've been through? My stomach turned. I'm not implying, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm asking, because the bottle came from you. Emery's sobs grew louder. I've had 3 miscarriages, Tara, she cried. 3! My marriage fell apart. I lost everything. And you think I would do this? She shook her head violently, like she was physically rejecting the accusation. My mother turned to me with eyes so cold they startled me. You're being paranoid, she said. Pregnancy hormones can make women irrational. I blinked. I actually blinked like I hadn't heard her correctly. I almost lost my baby, I said. I collapsed. The doctor said she's showing developmental compromise. This isn't hormones. This is real. My mother's lips tightened. You're making a serious accusation against your sister, she said. You can't take that back. I looked at my father. He still hadn't moved. He still hadn't said a word. He didn't even look at me. And something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. A thread that had been holding my hope together for decades finally broke. Because in that moment, I understood something with a clarity that hurt. My father wasn't silent because he didn't know what was happening. He was silent because speaking would be inconvenient. Because defending me would require him to confront my mother. Because protecting me would require him to choose. And he had never chosen me. Not once. I took a step forward, holding out the lab report. Read it, I said. My mother didn't take it. She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she said, You need to go home and rest. Emery sniffled dramatically. Please, she whispered, voice trembling. I can't believe you would think I'm capable of that. I stared at her, and for a second, I saw something behind her tears. Not sadness, not pain, satisfaction, like she had expected this. Like she had known my parents would do exactly what they were doing. And then I realized something even worse. This wasn't just Emery being cruel. This was Emery using my family like a weapon. She didn't need to convince them with logic. She just needed to cry. Because my parents had been trained by years of her performances to respond to her tears like they were truth. I felt dizzy again. Not from iron deficiency this time. From the emotional whiplash, I turned toward the door. My mother called after me, her voice sharp. Tara, don't do anything stupid. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't look back. I'm not the one doing something stupid, I said quietly. Then I walked out. In the car, I sat in the driveway for a long time. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breathing was shallow. My chest hurt. And then, for the first time since the hospital, I cried. Not because I was weak, because I was finally seeing the truth. I had walked into that house with evidence that someone had tried to harm my unborn child. And I had walked out feeling like I was the villain, like I had done something wrong, like I had attacked a grieving woman who had lost everything. I drove home in silence. That night, I took the emergency supplements the doctor had prescribed. I lay in bed with my hands on my belly, whispering to my daughter, begging her to keep fighting. And I promised myself something I had never promised myself before. I promised I would stop trying to be understood by people who didn't want to understand me. Because if my family was willing to protect Emery even when my baby was at risk, then I couldn't afford to be the quiet daughter anymore. I couldn't afford to be polite. I couldn't afford to be invisible. And I couldn't afford to wait for someone else to save me. I didn't know how yet. I didn't have a plan. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I didn't find proof strong enough to destroy Emery's mask, she would come back. And next time, she wouldn't stop at sugar water. For the next 3 weeks after I left my parents' house, I lived in a state of quiet survival. On the outside, I looked fine. I still answered client calls. I still sent invoices. I still smiled politely when people asked how my pregnancy was going. But inside, everything had changed. Because once you realize someone close to you is capable of hurting you, your entire world becomes unfamiliar. The air in your home feels different. The sound of footsteps in the hallway makes your heart jump. Even silence stops feeling peaceful. It starts feeling like a trap. My doctor put me on emergency supplements immediately. I had to take high-dose iron that made my stomach churn, folic acid, and a nutritional protocol that felt like a military schedule. They monitored me closely, checking my blood levels and the baby's development every week. Every appointment felt like a test I couldn't afford to fail. The doctor told me the same thing each time. We caught it in time, but she always said it with a look that meant, barely. The developmental concerns didn't disappear overnight. The baby was still measuring slightly behind. The ultrasound technician kept her expression neutral, but I learned to read small shifts in people's faces. I learned to read what they weren't saying. And in the quiet moments at home, when I placed my hands on my belly and waited for my daughter to move, I felt something that scared me more than anger. I felt doubt, not about my baby, about myself. Because the truth was, my mind kept replaying my mother's words. "You're being paranoid." My sister's sobbing voice. "How could you accuse me after everything I've lost?" And the worst part was, a small part of me still wanted to believe them. That part of me was exhausted. That part of me didn't want to accept that my own sister would do something so calculated. That part of me wanted to return to the old lie that I was safe as long as I stayed quiet and agreeable. But the other part of me, the part that had collapsed on the bathroom floor with my hands wrapped around my stomach, didn't have the luxury of denial anymore. That part of me was awake, and she was watching. I stopped letting Emery into my apartment, not directly, not dramatically. I didn't confront her again. I didn't accuse her. I didn't send angry texts. I simply became unavailable. If she called, I didn't answer. If she texted, I replied hours later with something vague. "Sorry, I'm resting." Doctor's orders. Feeling tired. And every time my phone lit up with her name, my stomach tightened. Because her messages didn't sound concerned. They sounded irritated. Like she wasn't checking on me because she cared. She was checking on me because she needed to know what I knew. One night, she sent, "How are your iron levels now?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to answer, because I couldn't believe she had the nerve to ask. I typed back, "Doctor says I'm improving." She responded instantly, "Good. Don't stress too much. Stress is bad for the baby." It was the kind of message that looks supportive to anyone else. But to me, it felt like a hand tightening around my throat. A reminder, a warning. I told myself I was imagining it. But the truth was, I had started noticing something about Emery that I had never noticed so clearly before. She didn't feel guilt. She felt entitlement, like she was owed my silence, like she was owed my trust, like she was owed my baby. And the more I pulled away, the more desperate she became to control the narrative. That's how my mother's call happened. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 4 o'clock. I had just returned from another ultrasound. My daughter's heartbeat was strong, but the doctor still wanted to monitor her closely. I had stopped by a pharmacy to pick up another round of supplements. When I walked into my apartment, my phone rang. "Mom," I hesitated, then I answered. "Tara," my mother said, and her voice was unusually gentle. That alone made my skin prickle. "Yes? I want you to come to dinner this weekend," she said. "Family dinner." I almost laughed, because my mother didn't do gentle invitations. She did commands. "What for?" I asked. A pause. Then she said, carefully, "Emery has news." My stomach dropped. "What kind of news?" My mother's voice warmed. "Good news," she said. "The kind we all need right now." I knew I should have said no. I knew I should have protected myself. But there was still a part of me that wanted to see it, wanted to understand, wanted to confirm what my instincts were already screaming. So I agreed. Saturday night, I drove to my parents' house with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The house looked the same as always, warm lights, manicured lawn, the smell of my mother's cooking drifting through the air. A normal family home, the kind people imagine when they hear the word safe. But I hadn't felt safe in that house in years. When I walked inside, my mother greeted me with a smile that looked practiced. My father nodded from his chair. Emery was already there, sitting at the dining table, wearing a soft, cream-colored dress that made her look delicate. She looked like a woman in a commercial. The grieving sister, the hopeful mother-to-be, the one you were supposed to root for. When she saw me, her lips curved into a small smile. Not warm, not loving, just satisfied. "Hey," she said, "you made it." I didn't respond much. I sat down quietly, my hands resting over my belly. Dinner began. My mother chatted about recipes. My father asked a question about the weather. Emery ate slowly, like she wanted everyone to watch her. Then, halfway through the meal, my mother clinked her glass gently. She turned to Emery with shining eyes. "Sweetheart," she said, "tell your sister." My throat tightened. Emery set down her fork. She placed one hand on her stomach dramatically. Then she looked at me and said the words that made the room spin. "I'm pregnant." For a second, the entire world went silent. Then my mother gasped, bursting into tears. "Oh my God," she cried. "Oh my God, Emery." My father actually smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in years. He stood up and walked around the table, pulling Emery into a hug. My mother sobbed against her shoulder. They were celebrating like this was a miracle, like this was the only pregnancy that mattered. I sat there frozen, my fork still in my hand, not because I was shocked she said it, because I was watching my parents become the exact people I had always known they were. Even now, even after what had happened to me, even after my baby had been put at risk, they were still choosing her. Emery reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, an ultrasound image. She held it up like a trophy. "I wanted it to be a surprise," she said, her voice trembling in a way that sounded rehearsed. But I couldn't keep it to myself. My mother cried harder. My father kissed Emery's forehead, and I stared at the ultrasound. Not at the tiny shape on it, at the date. Because I work with numbers for a living, I noticed details, and the date on that ultrasound was stamped clearly. 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks. I felt a cold wave wash through me, because 7 weeks ago, Emery had been in my apartment constantly. 7 weeks ago, she had been asking about my tonic schedule. 7 weeks ago, she had been watching me swallow those doses. If she had known she was pregnant then, why was she so obsessed with me? Then I saw it, not in the ultrasound, in Emery's hands. Her fingers trembled slightly at the edges of the paper, not with joy, with strain, like she was holding something heavy, like she was holding a lie. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. Emery had been pregnant. The ultrasound was real. But something had happened between then and now. Something she wasn't saying. Something she was hiding. Because Emery wasn't glowing. She wasn't radiant. She didn't have that soft, hopeful look women get when they're truly carrying a new life. She looked hollow, tight, like she was forcing her body to play a role it no longer belonged in. I realized in a flash what had happened. She had miscarried again, her fourth loss, and instead of telling anyone, instead of letting my parents grieve with her, she had kept the ultrasound. She had kept the proof of a pregnancy that no longer existed, and she was using it as a weapon, a performance, a way to steal the spotlight back, a way to control the narrative before anyone could start asking questions about mine. My mouth went dry. I looked up slowly. Across the table, Emery met my eyes. And in that moment, there was no sisterhood, no warmth, no grief, just cold, steady certainty. She knew that I knew, and she was daring me to say it. Go ahead. Accuse me. Try. I could almost hear the words in her silence, because she had already set the stage. I was the paranoid sister, the hormonal one, the one who accused a grieving woman of poisoning her vitamins. If I spoke now, I wouldn't be brave. I would be unhinged. My parents would never believe me. They were already crying for her. My mother reached across the table and squeezed Emery's hand. "We're going to do this right," she said. "We're going to make sure this baby is safe. We're going to take care of you." I sat there, my heart pounding, not because I was jealous, but because I was suddenly terrified. Because if Emery was willing to lie about being pregnant, if she was willing to weaponize a miscarriage, then she wasn't just unstable. She was strategic. And strategic people don't stop when they get away with something. They escalate. I forced myself to swallow. I forced my face to remain calm. I forced myself to smile. "Congratulations," I said quietly. Emery's lips curved. "Thank you," she replied. And then, as the dinner continued and my parents laughed and cried around her, I sat there with one hand on my belly, feeling my daughter move inside me. And I understood something with a clarity that made my blood run cold. My sister wasn't just competing with me anymore. She was replacing me in my family, in the inheritance, in motherhood. And if she couldn't win, honestly, she would make sure I couldn't win at all. After that dinner, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't drive home shaking with rage the way people expect in stories like this. I drove home in silence. Because something inside me had shifted. I had spent my entire life trying to be understood by my family, trying to explain myself in a way that would make them choose me, even once. But sitting at that table and watching my parents celebrate a pregnancy, my sister was clearly faking. I realized the truth. They didn't misunderstand me. They didn't need more explanation. They had already chosen. And once you accept that, you stop wasting energy begging for a place at someone else's table. You start building your own. That night, I locked my apartment door, checked it twice, and then stood in my kitchen, staring at the counter where my prenatal tonic used to sit. The empty space looked like a scar. I kept thinking about Emery's eyes across the table, cold, steady, almost calm. She wasn't acting out of impulse. She was acting out of strategy. And strategy meant she would not stop until she got what she wanted, or until someone stopped her. I sat down with my laptop and began making a list. Not an emotional list, a practical one. Who had access to my apartment? When had Emery visited? What days had I been out? What evidence could prove she tampered with my tonic? It felt surreal, like I was preparing for a business audit. But maybe that's why I survived. Because my brain knew how to organize chaos. The next morning, I called my building's management office. I kept my voice calm. "I need a copy of the lobby security footage from 6 weeks ago," I said. Specifically, the afternoon of March 14th. The property manager hesitated. "Is everything okay, Miss Sanders?" I paused, then said the truth, just enough of it. "My doctor believes someone may have entered my apartment without permission. That did it." His tone changed instantly. "Okay," he said. "Let me see what we have." An hour later, he emailed me a secure link. I sat on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees and started watching. The footage wasn't glamorous, grainy, slightly angled, the kind of video you barely notice unless you're searching for your own life inside it. I watched myself come and go. I watched delivery drivers, neighbors, maintenance staff, I watched hours of nothing, and then, at 2:15 p.m., I saw her. Emery. She walked into the lobby wearing sunglasses and a long coat, even though it was warm outside. She paused, looked around, and then walked toward the elevator with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. My heart started pounding. I fast-forwarded. At 3:40 p.m., she reappeared. Same coat, same sunglasses, same calm. She exited the building without rushing, without panic, like she had just stopped by for tea. 85 minutes. She had been inside my apartment for 85 minutes while I was across town at a client meeting. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. It wasn't proof of tampering, but it was proof of access. It was proof I wasn't crazy. It was proof she had the opportunity. And suddenly, all the little moments from the past 8 weeks made sense. Her obsession with my schedule, her questions about my dosage, her casual entitlement in my kitchen, her help that felt like surveillance. I copied the footage onto a flash drive and placed it in a drawer beside my bed like it was a weapon I might need later. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my doctor. Her voice was urgent in a way I had never heard before. "Tara," she said, "we ran additional tests on the baby." My stomach dropped instantly. "What did you find?" She took a breath. "She's showing developmental delays consistent with prolonged nutritional deficiency," she said. "We can still intervene. I believe we caught it in time. But I need you to understand something." I held my breath. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "Someone deliberately tampered with your supplements. And because you are a pregnant patient, I'm required by law to report it." The words hit me like a wave. "So, what happens now?" I whispered. "It becomes a criminal investigation," she said gently. "The police will contact you." After I hung up, I sat there in the silence of my apartment and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not fear, not sadness. Fight. Because now it wasn't just my suspicion. It wasn't just my word against Emery's tears. It was official. It was documented. It was real. The police came the next morning. Detective Morrison was in his late 40s with graying hair and tired eyes. He carried a small notebook and moved through my apartment with the careful calm of someone who had seen too much. He sat at my kitchen table while I told him everything. The tonic, the lab results, Emery's visits, the dinner, the ultrasound date, the footage. He listened without interrupting, only asking questions when I paused. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me with something that felt like sympathy but also caution. "Mrs. Sanders," he said, "I want to be honest with you. Family cases are complicated." I swallowed hard. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," he said carefully, "without direct evidence placing your sister's hands on the bottle, she could claim someone else had access. A maintenance worker, a delivery person, anyone." My chest tightened. "So you're saying there's nothing you can do?" He shook his head. "I'm saying we'll investigate thoroughly," he said, "but these things take time. We need evidence that can hold up in court." Time, that word made me feel sick. Because Emery didn't need time. She had already proven she could move quickly, quietly, and cruelly. If she had been willing to starve my baby for 8 weeks, what would she do next while the police moved slowly through procedure? After Detective Morrison left, I stood in my kitchen staring at the door long after it closed. I knew he was doing his job. I knew the law had to move carefully. But I also knew something else. I could not afford to be passive. Not now. Not when my daughter's life and my future were still at stake. So I did something I had never done before. I hired help. Real help. The kind of help my family never offered me. My lawyer referred me to a private investigator named Patricia Wells. When I met her, she was 58, with sharp eyes and a posture that made her look like she could knock a man down with a single sentence. Her office was small, plain, and smelled faintly of black coffee. She didn't waste time. "I'm not going to do anything illegal," she said immediately. "I don't break into places. I don't steal records. I don't hack phones." I nodded. "That's not what I want," I said. Patricia studied me for a moment. "You're pregnant," she said, "and you look like someone who hasn't slept in months." I swallowed. "I haven't." She leaned forward. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the moment your grandmother's will was read. So I did. I told her about the inheritance, the condition, the bathroom whisper, the tonic, the collapse, the lab results, my parents' reaction, the dinner, the ultrasound. The way Emery looked at me like she was daring me to speak. Patricia didn't react emotionally. She reacted like a woman building a case. When I finished, she wrote one final note, then looked up. Your sister is careful, she said. But careful people always leave traces. What kind of traces? I asked. Patterns, she said. Purchases, social media behavior, communication with someone who helped her. People like this rarely work alone. My stomach twisted. You think she had help? Patricia's eyes narrowed. I don't think, she said. I suspect. And suspicion is where investigations begin. She stood and opened a file drawer, pulling out a clean folder. I want you to do something for me, she said. What? Write down every single time your sister visited you, she said. Every date, every time, every conversation you remember, every bottle she brought, every question she asked. I nodded. I could do that. Numbers were my language. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to control. Patricia gave me a small, grim smile. Good, she said, because we're going to build a timeline so solid your sister won't be able to cry her way out of it. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months, not because I thought the nightmare was over, but because for the first time, I wasn't alone in it. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and began writing. March 3rd, Emery brought the first bottle. Asked about dosage. March 7th, Emery visited again. Watched me take it. March 14th, Emery entered my building while I was gone. 85 minutes. March 18th, Emery asked about my iron levels. March 22nd, Emery opened my bottle to check the dose. Each line I wrote made my hands shake, because the more I put it on paper, the clearer it became. This wasn't a moment of jealousy. This wasn't a grief spiral. This was a plan, and plans don't stop on their own. They stop when they're exposed. That night, as I finished the timeline, my phone buzzed with a message. A text from an unknown number. No name, no greeting. Just 6 words. Stop digging, Tara. Focus on your baby. My blood turned cold, because I knew exactly who had sent it, and I knew what it meant. Emery knew I was moving. She knew I was gathering evidence, and she was warning me before she decided to do something worse. After the anonymous text arrived, stop digging, Tara. Focus on your baby. I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared of a stranger. Because I knew it wasn't a stranger. It was Emery. She was reminding me that she could still reach me, still watch me, still control the temperature of my life, even from a distance. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was overreacting. You don't warn someone to stop digging unless you're hiding something worth burying. The next morning, I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison and Patricia. Patricia responded within minutes. Good. That means we're close. That was the difference between people like Patricia and people like my family. My family saw danger and pretended it wasn't real. Patricia saw danger and treated it like a map. She told me to keep my routine normal, to avoid direct confrontation, to let her do the work. So I did. I went to my prenatal appointment. I drank water. I took my emergency supplements. I answered client emails. I tried to look like a woman whose biggest worry was nursery furniture. But every time I stepped outside my apartment, I felt like I was walking through invisible wires. Like one wrong move would trigger something. Patricia worked fast. She started with Emery's public social media accounts. At first, I thought that sounded ridiculous. Emery's Instagram was full of carefully filtered photos and vague inspirational quotes, the kind of page that screams, "Look how strong I am," while hiding everything that's actually happening. But Patricia wasn't looking for the posts. She was looking for the gaps. She printed out a timeline of Emery's pregnancy content and laid it across her desk like evidence. 2 months ago, Emery had posted constantly about morning sickness, cravings, and the journey. Then suddenly, silence. 3 full weeks with no posts at all. Then the posts resumed, but the tone changed. They weren't natural anymore. They were performative, like she was trying too hard to convince the world. Patricia circled the gap with a pen. "This is when she miscarried," she said calmly. My stomach tightened. "You can tell that from Instagram?" Patricia's eyes stayed sharp. "You can tell a lot from patterns," she said. "People don't stop posting when they're happy. They stop posting when something happens they can't control." The next step was purchases. Patricia drove to health food stores near Emery's neighborhood. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't demand anything. She simply asked questions. At the third store, a cashier remembered a woman matching Emery's description. The woman had bought multiple bottles of a glucose solution, the kind used to make homemade sports drinks. She paid in cash. But the store had security cameras. Patricia didn't try to take the footage herself. Instead, she documented the store location, the date, the cashier's statement, and the camera system. Then she handed the information to Detective Morrison. Now he had something he could use legally. Probable cause. And once police have probable cause, they don't move slowly anymore. They move like a door finally opening. But the biggest breakthrough came from a name I had never heard before. Danielle. Patricia called me late one afternoon. "Tara," she said, "your sister reconnected with someone recently. A nurse." I felt my pulse spike. "A nurse?" "Her name is Danielle," Patricia said. "They went to nursing school together 15 years ago. They started messaging again 2 months ago. 2 months ago. Right when Emery started showing up at my apartment with that tonic, my hands began to shake." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means your sister didn't just wake up one day and decide to poison you," Patricia said. "She researched, she planned, and she asked someone with medical knowledge how long it would take." I sat down hard on my couch. My daughter kicked inside me, like she could feel my fear. Patricia continued. "I found evidence of calls and messages between them," she said. "I'm not going to contact Danielle. That's for the police. But I'm sending everything to Detective Morrison right now." After I hung up, I sat in silence. I kept thinking about Emery's face at the dinner table, the way she held that ultrasound like a prop, the way she stared at me, like she was daring me to challenge her. And I realized something. Emery wasn't just jealous. She wasn't just grieving. She was dangerous. 2 weeks later, Detective Morrison called me. His voice sounded different this time. Not cautious, not sympathetic, certain awe. "We brought Danielle in for questioning," he said. My heart stopped. What did she say? There was a pause. Then he said, "Everything." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my knuckles hurt. "Mrs. Sanders," he continued, "Danielle is a nurse with a career and a family. When we explained she could face charges as an accessory to assault on a pregnant woman, she agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity." I closed my eyes. My throat tightened. "So, Emery really did it?" "Yes," he said. "And it's worse than you think." The words made my stomach drop. Detective Morrison spoke slowly, like he was trying not to overwhelm me. "Danielle says your sister approached her 2 months ago. She asked how to make something look like prenatal vitamins. She asked how long it would take for nutritional deficiency to show symptoms. And she asked about substances that could prevent future pregnancies." My entire body went cold. Prevent future pregnancies. That wasn't just sabotage. That was eradication. My voice came out as a whisper. She wanted to make me infertile? "Danielle refused to help with that last request," Detective Morrison said. "But your sister told her she would find another way." I couldn't breathe. I felt like the walls of my apartment were closing in. Because suddenly, the story wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't even about Emery wanting to win. It was about Emery wanting me erased. My motherhood, my future, my entire identity. Detective Morrison continued. "With Danielle's testimony, we had enough to obtain warrants. We searched your sister's apartment, her laptop, and her financial records." I sank into a chair. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. "What did you find?" I asked. "Everything," he said. "They found browser searches, vitamin deficiency timelines, pregnancy development charts, how to cause miscarriage naturally, how to damage fertility. Each search time-stamped. each one occurring in the weeks before my tonic was switched. They found receipts, a chemical supply website, a substance flagged immediately for analysis. They found messages, not explicit, because Emery was careful, but enough paired with Danielle's testimony to show intent. And then, finally, they subpoenaed Emery's medical records. I already knew what they would reveal, but hearing it confirmed still felt like being punched. Emery miscarried 3 weeks before she announced her pregnancy at that dinner, Detective Morrison said. My chest tightened. So she lied to everyone. Yes, he said. She held up an ultrasound from a pregnancy that no longer existed. She used it to manipulate your parents. I stared at the wall in front of me. My mind flashed to my mother crying, my father smiling, the way they had hugged Emery like she was the only daughter in the room. I thought about myself sitting there, pregnant, recovering from an attack on my body, and still being invisible. And I realized something else. Emery didn't just poison my tonic. She poisoned the entire family dynamic. She had turned my parents into weapons. She had turned their favoritism into a shield. And she had done it so well that even now, part of me still felt guilty for ruining her life. Then Detective Morrison said the final piece. The substance we recovered, he said, has now been confirmed by forensics. My stomach dropped again. What is it? There was a pause. Then he said it. It's capable of causing permanent reproductive damage with long-term exposure. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I couldn't speak, because my mind kept returning to one thought. If I hadn't collapsed, if the doctor hadn't tested that bottle, if I had kept swallowing that sugar water another few weeks, Emery would have moved to the next stage of her plan. And the next stage wasn't just starving my baby. It was stealing my ability to ever be a mother again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in silence with the phone pressed to my ear and listened as Detective Morrison explained what would happen next. There would be a preliminary hearing. Charges would be filed. Bail conditions. No contact orders. And then, trial. When I hung up, my daughter kicked again. A strong, stubborn movement. Like she was reminding me she was still here. Still fighting. I stood up slowly and walked to the mirror in my hallway. I looked at myself, my swollen belly, my pale face, the dark circles under my eyes, and I realized something with painful clarity. My sister had tried to destroy me, not in a moment of rage, not in a breakdown, in a calculated, researched, step-by-step plan, and now, finally, the world was going to see it. The hearing was set for the following week, and I walked into that courtroom 8 months pregnant, with my hands folded over my belly, knowing this was the first time in my life I wasn't going to be the invisible daughter. Because this time, Emery's tears wouldn't be enough. This time, there would be receipts. There would be timestamps. There would be evidence. And when the prosecutor began laying it out piece by piece, I watched my sister's face do something I had never seen before. Her mask didn't slip. It cracked, and the sound of it breaking was louder than any scream she had ever performed. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. In my mind, courtrooms had always looked like the movies, grand, echoing, dramatic. But this one felt tight, almost suffocating, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired and slightly unreal. I walked in 8 months pregnant, my back aching, my hands folded over my belly like a shield. My lawyer guided me to a seat behind the prosecution table. And across the aisle, Emery sat beside her defense attorney in a navy dress that made her look almost respectable. Almost, our parents sat behind her in the gallery. My mother clutched a tissue like it was a lifeline. My father stared straight ahead, expression blank, as if he could disappear into the air if he stayed still enough. For a moment, I felt the old instinct rise in me, the instinct to shrink, to make myself smaller, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But then my daughter kicked hard against my ribs, a sharp, stubborn reminder that I wasn't here for peace. I was here for protection. I was here for truth. The hearing began. The prosecutor stood and introduced the case with calm precision, like he was laying bricks. And then he started building. First came the lab report. He held up the document and read the findings aloud. The prenatal tonic recovered from my apartment contained no vitamins at all, only sugar, water, and food coloring. A counterfeit designed to look legitimate while delivering nothing. The words echoed in the room, and I saw Emery's jaw tighten. Her eyes flicked toward my parents for half a second, like she was checking whether they still believed her. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father didn't move. Second came the security footage. A screen was rolled into the courtroom, and the grainy video played. Emery walking into my apartment building at 2:15 p.m. Emery leaving at 3:40 p.m. 85 minutes. The timestamp was clear. The image was clear. There was no denying she had been there. I felt my stomach twist, not because it was shocking, but because it was so ordinary. She wasn't sneaking. She wasn't hiding. She walked in like she had every right, like my life belonged to her. Third came Danielle. She walked to the witness stand with trembling hands, her face pale, her voice shaking as she swore to tell the truth. The immunity deal had made her cooperative, but it hadn't made it easy. She described how Emery had contacted her 2 months earlier asking for help. How to make something look like prenatal vitamins. How long nutritional deficiency would take to show symptoms. And how to obtain substances that could prevent future pregnancies. The courtroom went silent at that last part. I felt my throat tighten, because even now, hearing it spoken aloud in public, it sounded too evil to be real. Danielle admitted she refused to help with the fertility-damaging substances, but she testified that Emery had said she would find another way. Then, the prosecutor displayed their text messages on the screen. They were vague, carefully worded, coded, indirect. But Danielle explained what each phrase meant. The code words, the deliberate ambiguity, the plan hidden in plain sight. And for the first time, I saw Emery's face change, not dramatically, not like a breakdown, just a subtle draining of color, like someone watching their escape route collapse. Fourth came the forensic analysis of Emery's laptop. Specialists had recovered deleted browser history, searches for vitamin deficiency timelines, searches for pregnancy development stages, searches for how to cause miscarriage naturally, searches for how to damage fertility undetectably. Each one time-stamped, each one occurring before my tonic was switched. I watched Emery's hands tighten around the edge of the table. Her defense attorney leaned in and whispered something urgently, but Emery didn't respond. She just stared forward, eyes fixed on nothing. Fifth came the medical records. The prosecutor read them with clinical precision. Emery had been pregnant. She had miscarried 3 weeks before announcing her pregnancy at the family dinner. The ultrasound she held up, the one my parents cried over, was from a pregnancy that no longer existed. She had looked our mother in the eyes and lied. She had looked our father in the eyes and lied. And she had looked at me across that table and dared me to speak. The prosecutor paused and let that sink in. Then came the final piece, the substance found in Emery's apartment. Forensics confirmed it was capable of causing permanent reproductive damage with prolonged exposure. It hadn't been used on me yet. But it had been purchased. It had been ready. It had been waiting. When the prosecutor said that, my mother made a sound I had never heard before. A small, strangled gasp, like a person finally realizing the monster they raised had teeth. Emery didn't cry. Not yet. She sat there with her lips pressed together so tightly they looked bloodless. When the judge asked if she understood the charges against her, her voice was barely audible. Yes. The judge set bail at $200,000. Strict conditions. No contact with me. No contact with Danielle. GPS, ankle monitor. Surrender passport. I watched Emery stand to leave, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not satisfaction. Relief. Like I had been holding my breath for 8 weeks and finally exhaled. But that relief lasted exactly 3 days. Detective Morrison called me on the 3rd morning. "Tara," he said, "Emery violated her bail conditions." My stomach dropped. What did she do? She created a fake social media account and messaged Danielle, he said. The message said, "You ruined my life. I hope you know what's coming." I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Because Emery couldn't stop performing. She couldn't stop controlling. Even with an ankle monitor, she still believed the world should bend to her will. The message was traced to her IP address, Detective Morrison continued. There will be an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. I went. I needed to see it. In that hearing, Emery looked smaller. Not because she was humbled, because she was cornered. The judge didn't hesitate. Bail revoked. When the officers approached with handcuffs, Emery didn't resist. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just turned and looked at our mother with eyes full of cold accusation. You finally chose her, Emery said quietly. After 30 years of choosing me, you finally chose her. My mother broke down, sobbing. My father stared at nothing. And I stood there with my hands on my belly, feeling oddly calm, because I realized something. Even now, Emery wasn't sorry for what she did to me. She was angry that she lost. That afternoon, during a recess, I stepped into the hallway to catch my breath. My back ached. My legs were swollen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like insects. I was rubbing my lower spine when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw my mother. She looked decades older than she had just weeks earlier. In her hands was the leather diary I had seen her hiding so many times. I started writing this 10 years ago, she said quietly. My throat tightened. Why? My mother swallowed hard. When I finally admitted to myself what Emery was becoming, she said. Every manipulation, every lie, every time your father told me I was being too hard on her, and I backed down. She held the diary out to me, not as evidence. It was too late for that. As confession. I failed you, she whispered. I chose the easier daughter over the better one. I stared at her. I wanted to feel triumph. I wanted to feel vindicated. But all I felt was exhaustion. I took the diary and nodded once. I didn't forgive her. I didn't punish her. I just accepted the truth. That evening, Ruth came to my apartment. She climbed the stairs slowly, her knees protesting, but she insisted on coming in person. In her hands was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Your grandmother gave me this before she died, Ruth said. She told me to give it to you when you were about to become a mother. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page covered in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. My dearest Tara, I read it with tears blurring my vision. She wrote about watching me be overlooked, watching my parents choose Emery, watching me achieve quietly while Emery performed loudly. She wrote that she was leaving the trust in my hands because I was the only one who would build instead of destroy. And then she wrote the words I had waited my entire life to hear. I see you. I always have. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not from grief, but from being seen. Finally, completely. 3 weeks later, I went into labor. As the nurses wheeled me toward delivery, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Emery tried to make a deal. Prosecution refused. Trial set for 3 months. Focus on your baby. Justice is coming. I silenced my phone. Justice could wait. Right now, I had a daughter to meet. She arrived at 3:47 inches the morning, screaming, perfect, alive, 7 pounds and 4 ounces of miracle. The doctor said it was remarkable. The intervention had come just in time. A few more weeks of deficiency, and the outcome might have been very different. I looked down at her tiny face, her fingers curling around mine like she had been waiting her whole existence to hold on. And I whispered the truth I had been carrying for months. You almost didn't make it, I told her. Someone tried to take you from me before I ever got to meet you. My daughter blinked up at me like she understood. But you're here, I whispered, and I will never let anyone make you invisible. Not ever. 3 months later, Emery's trial began. It lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw what I saw. They saw the premeditation. They saw the research. They saw 8 weeks of calculated harm inflicted on a woman whose only crime was getting pregnant first. Her defense tried to claim grief and mental health issues, and there was truth in her grief. But grief doesn't excuse planning. It doesn't excuse poisoning. It doesn't excuse trying to erase someone else's future. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Felony assault on a pregnant woman. Criminal tampering with consumer products. Witness intimidation. 8 years in state prison. A permanent restraining order. complete forfeiture of any claim to our grandmother's trust. When the judge read the sentence, Emery finally broke down. She sobbed and shook and buried her face in her hands. But even her tears felt rehearsed. One last performance for an audience that no longer believed her. I watched from the gallery with my daughter against my chest and felt no triumph. Justice isn't sweet. It doesn't undo what was done. It doesn't erase the fear. It doesn't heal the betrayal. Justice is just necessary. It closes a door so you can finally walk through a different one. As sole beneficiary trustee of the $12 million fund, I could have disappeared into comfort. I could have bought a mansion. I could have lived a life of quiet luxury and never looked back. But that wasn't what my grandmother wanted, and it wasn't what I wanted. I kept what I needed for my daughter's future, and I built something Emery could never destroy. I established the Eleanor Sanders Foundation. It supports pregnant women in crisis, survivors of family abuse, and women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. The first scholarship went to a young mother named Maria, who was escaping a manipulative family that tried to control every part of her life. When I handed her that check, I saw myself in her eyes. The fear, the hope, the desperate need to believe that a fresh start was possible. A few months after the trial ended, a letter arrived. It was from my father. He wrote that he had been silent for 30 years, that he saw what Emery was becoming, that he saw my mother enabling her, that he saw me shrinking into the background. And he said something that made me stare at the paper for a long time. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's delayed destruction. He enclosed an old photograph, him holding newborn me in the hospital. In his eyes was something I had never seen directed at me in my entire life. Uncomplicated love. I didn't call him. I didn't write back. Some bridges are too burned. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I placed it in a box, along with my grandmother's letter, along with my mother's diary, along with the parts of my past that no longer had the power to hurt me. Then I sold my city apartment and moved to a quiet coastal town 2 hours away. I found a small house with a garden and windows that let in the sound of waves every morning. Ruth relocated to a cottage 3 streets over, becoming the grandmother figure my daughter would actually know. We share Sunday dinners now. We plant vegetables together in the spring. We are building the family that blood failed to provide. And on my daughter's 6-month birthday, I sat on my porch at sunset with her sleeping in my arms, the sky painted orange and pink, the air smelling like salt and jasmine. Ruth brought tea and settled beside me. For a long moment, we said nothing. Then Ruth whispered, "Your grandmother would be so proud." I looked down at my daughter, healthy, peaceful, completely loved. And I thought about the 30 years I spent trying to earn a place in a family that refused to see me. They never did. But I finally learned something I wish I had learned sooner. Belonging isn't something you earn from people who don't want to give it. It's something you build, with people who choose you back. Some people spend their whole lives fighting for a seat at someone else's table, begging for scraps of approval that never come. I finally learned that the only table that matters is the one you build yourself. I built mine with solid wood and open chairs. There's room for anyone who chooses love over power, truth over comfort, and family over blood. My name is Tara Sanders. I am a mother. I am a survivor. And this is not the end of my story. It's the beginning. Tara's story isn't just a shocking family betrayal, it's a reminder of how dangerous it can be when love is used as a disguise. What makes this story so haunting isn't the inheritance, or even the courtroom drama. It's the quiet truth underneath it all. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who know our routines, our weaknesses, and exactly what we're afraid to lose. This video shows how jealousy doesn't always explode loudly. Sometimes it moves silently, patiently, hiding behind gifts, fake tears, and a smile that looks like support. And it reminds us of something just as important, that survival isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about evidence, boundaries, and the courage to stop begging for love from people who refuse to give it. If you've ever been the overlooked one, the invisible sibling, the person who had to fight twice as hard just to be seen, I hope this story made you feel less alone. Your instincts matter. Your pain is real. and you deserve a life built on safety, not sacrifice. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Hanjiwit Yagi and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We're building a space where every voice matters and where no one has to feel invisible again.